Is it possible for you to be too equanimous? That's a question we're going to tackle coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you haven't checked out my courses over on the Online Dharma Institute, I suggest you check them out at the end of this video. That's onlinedharma.org, or use the link up above on the screen. So is it possible to be too equanimous? That's the question we're tackling today. And we're going to be looking at early Buddhism in particular, at what the Buddha had to say about equanimity. And equanimity in early Buddhism was one of the highest virtues. It was a virtue, a way of being that was almost equivalent to awakening itself. Because to be equanimous really means to be okay with whatever arises, to be essentially not swayed by the worldly winds, these worldly winds of praise and blame, of gain and loss, of fame and infamy, and of pleasure and pain. And these are the winds that generally push our psychology, our minds, into different directions of loving and hating, of getting caught up in various patterns of obsessive thinking and so on. The kinds of things that make life difficult. And to be equanimous is to basically leave them all behind, to be in a position of what's called imperturbability, if you like. Or at least that's one of the words that's used to describe this kind of state in the early Buddhist texts. That you're imperturbable, that you're not able to be swayed, that you're like a mountain where the storms pass over the mountain, but the mountain itself is not swayed. So then the question is it possible to be too equanimous? And this seems like a contradiction in terms almost. That what we want in Buddhism, the aim of awakening, is to be at a position of perfect imperturbability, where we aren't swayed by anything. But it seems that there are some ways in which we indeed can be too equanimous. And there's an interesting paper. It's actually part of, I believe, the Encyclopedia of Buddhism, an entry by Anālayo, Bhikkhu Anālayo, a great scholar of early Buddhism, where he tackles the question of equanimity generally, and says there are cases where it's possible to be too equanimous. So let's look at a couple of those here. The first one relates to a discussion, a Dharma talk that Sariputta was giving to a number of monks. Sariputta, many of us will know, was sort of the Buddha's right-hand disciple. He was the disciple who was foremost in wisdom. In other words, he was the disciple who knew the Dharma the best. And so he was giving a Dharma talk to a number of other monastics. And every once in a while, one of the monastics, a man named Udayi, would contradict him. And the monastic would contradict Sariputta, then Sariputta would continue his talk, and Udayi would contradict him again, and this happened several times. And eventually, the Buddha arrived. So in other words, the Sariputta had been giving this talk and the Buddha was not there, then the Buddha arrived, and Udayi kept doing this. Udayi kept contradicting Sariputta even in the Buddha's presence. And so eventually Sariputta, realizing that he was not getting across his message, decided simply to stop talking because clearly he was not really being listened to. And at that point, the Buddha spoke up. And the Buddha said, in fact, the Buddha spoke to Ananda, who was his attendant, who had been listening in the audience. And so what the Buddha said was, Ananda, there's a senior mendicant being harassed, and you just watch it happening. Don't you have any compassion for a senior mendicant who is being harassed? So this is a case where Udayi, of course, was not correct in his claims against Sariputta. He was saying things that were false, and nobody else was speaking up about it. And so this just continued and continued because nobody was willing to correct Udayi. And as a result, what ended up happening was a kind of how the Buddha describes a sort of argumentative harassment of a senior mendicant or monastic monk. And here we see that, in fact, what the Buddha is describing is a situation in which the monks were being too equanimous. They were being too imperturbable in the face of repeated harassment of somebody. And in another sutta, the wanderer, an ascetic wanderer named Potalya, is in discussion with the Buddha about various matters. And the Buddha asks Potalya, or I should say he tells Potalya, there are 4 kinds of people in the world. The first kind of person criticizes somebody rightly, but does not praise them. The second one praises somebody rightly, but does not criticize. The third does not praise or criticize. And the fourth praises rightly and criticizes rightly. And the Buddha asks Potalya, which one of these 4 people is best? And Potalya says, the third one, the one who does not either praise or criticize. And the Buddha asks, why? Why is the third person the best? And Potalya says, because equanimity is best. In other words, Potalya is basically saying that being equanimous is the best kind of situation you can be in, one where you aren't judging other people, where you are keeping your own counsel, as it were. However, the Buddha responds that no, it's the fourth person who is best, the person who criticizes rightly and praises rightly. And when Potalya asks him why, the Buddha says that it's because praising and criticizing at the right time, correctly and substantively, is best. And that is because, in fact, he says, understanding of the time and the context is best. In other words, it's best to understand in what time and in what context to praise, and in what time and in what context to criticize. That is, in fact, trumps the idea of equanimity. Equanimity is good, but it's better, at least the Buddha says, to understand in what time and in what context to be equanimous, and in what time and in what context to praise and criticize. And I think that is the deeper kind of instruction here, although it may be somewhat surprising to some of us. It may be surprising because in many Buddhist circles, not all by any means, but certainly in many Buddhist circles or Buddhist talks, we'll hear the claim or the belief, the approach, the practice, that we should not judge other people, that we should be without judgment, that we should not, again, that we should, like following Potalya, should not praise or criticize somebody. And indeed, this is said, I think, for good reason on the whole, because all too often our praise and our criticism, in particular our criticism really, is not done with an eye to time and context. Instead, it's done at the wrong time, in the wrong context, and often without a mind of kindness. In other words, it's coming from the wrong place. If praise or criticism is coming from the wrong place, then it can indeed be harmful. If our criticism is coming from a mind, from a heart of antagonism, of anger, of hatred, then of course it's going to only make things worse. And of course, if praise is done with a mind of greed, where we want somebody from them because we're praising them because we want something in return, that's equally bad. We can see this. And again, in the same way, criticism all too often is not constructive criticism. And this, I think, happens, again, more often than it should, where we criticize destructively in order to take somebody down, instead of criticizing constructively in a way that allows the person to learn from it and shows perhaps a way out. And indeed, if we don't praise or criticize, and let's just stick with criticism right now, because I think it's the harder one, if we don't criticize with an eye to time and context, and if we don't criticize with an eye to our own mindset, to how we are actually coming to that criticism, then criticism just amounts to another version of what the Buddha termed argument and dispute. This kind of way of being that creates enmity between people. Then even criticism can become harassment, as we saw in the case of Udayi and Sariputta. It becomes a problem. And this is, I think, why in most contexts the Buddha was very much against argument and dispute. Certainly within the Sangha, his general feeling was that argument and dispute was a bad thing, because again, all too often it's done with the wrong mindset, at the wrong time, in the wrong place, simply out of kind of an egoistic desire to make our own views heard by other people, and not in a constructive fashion. But again, the deeper message here is that judgment is good. Judgment is necessary if people are going to learn. If you are going to be able to teach somebody, if somebody's going to learn how to see their way more clearly down the path, they're going to have judgment at times given to them. It may be indeed a judgment of praise, that you're doing the right thing, keep going. But at times, all of us need kind and constructive criticism of the kind, I see what you're trying to do, but really you're better off doing something else. That kind of thing. And seen in that light, where we're criticizing or praising at the right time, with the right mindset, in the right context, it's necessary. It is absolutely essential if people like us are going to learn and progress. And I'm sure some of you are thinking that praise and criticism are all fine for many people, in particular criticism, to learn so they can learn from it, but that there are some people who don't learn from criticism. There are some people who are particularly obstinate or stubborn, who don't like being criticized, who lash back at it, or simply or simply don't listen to criticism. And indeed, that is correct, and the Buddha recognized that. And for the Buddha, basically, criticism was apt and proper in the case that the person was going to be open to it. And of course, to do that, you have to find the right time and place and context to give the criticism. But if we cannot find the right time and place to give criticism because the person is simply not open to it, then indeed, the Buddha says that we should not underestimate the value of equanimity with respect to such a person. So here we are with equanimity once again, that if somebody is not open to criticism, then our last resort is a resort of equanimity, is a resort of imperturbability with respect to them. They are going to be, as the Buddha might say, heirs to their own karma. They're going to be having to deal with whatever problems they themselves have set up. But if our criticism will not be listened to by them, then there's no point in criticizing them. Now, that said, of course, there may be other things we can do to minimize the danger or the damage that this person does, but that's not the issue here. Well, the issue here is simply about criticizing them in order to make them understand. And if you can't do that, then indeed, equanimity is the right virtue to be maintaining with respect to them. So yes, we can be indeed too equanimous in some circumstances when things need to be done that will help the matter. If you find these Dharma talks of mine useful to you in your life and your practice, check out my Patreon page. It's linked down below. You can help out the channel as so many people have done, and I'm very thankful for them. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. Consider also sending it around to people who may not have heard this Dharma talk or these Dharma talks of mine. And I hope we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you be well.